Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. I met him on a forum for rare book collectors. It sounds harmless, right? Just a bunch of nerds, myself very much included, gushing over first editions and obscure authors. We bonded over a shared love for a particularly macabre collection of Victorian-era ghost stories. His username was InkStainedSoul, which, in retrospect, should have been a massive red flag. But at the time, I thought it was just quirky. We messaged each other back and forth for weeks, debating the merits of different editions, sharing our favorite passages, and gradually, revealing more about ourselves. He was intelligent, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. He was also intensely private, which I initially found intriguing. He never shared pictures of himself and deflected any personal questions with vague, poetic answers. He said he preferred to let his mind be his introduction. Again, red flag, but I was too caught up in the intellectual connection to notice. He lived in a small town a few hours away from me, and eventually, he suggested we meet in person. I was hesitant at first, but the pull was too strong. I felt like I had known him for years, even though I knew almost nothing about him. We agreed to meet at a secluded cafe halfway between our towns. It was a place he recommended, saying it had an old-world charm that I would appreciate. The day of the meeting, I was a nervous wreck. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, what to say, and how to act. I wanted to make a good impression, to prove that I was just as interesting and intelligent in person as I was online. I arrived at the cafe early, and as I waited, my anxiety grew. The cafe was even more secluded than I had imagined, tucked away on a quiet side street, with dim lighting and heavy curtains. It felt more like a speakeasy than a coffee shop. He arrived precisely on time. He was tall and thin, with piercing blue eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He was dressed in a dark suit and tie, which seemed oddly formal for a casual meeting. He had an intense, almost unsettling gaze that made me feel like he was studying me, dissecting me. But again, I chalked it up to nerves. The conversation started off well enough. We talked about books, as expected, and he was just as knowledgeable and articulate in person as he was online. But as the hours passed, the conversation took a darker turn. He started talking about death, about the fleeting nature of life, and about the beauty of decay. He spoke with a disturbing fascination about serial killers and unsolved mysteries, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. I tried to steer the conversation towards lighter topics, but he always managed to bring it back to the macabre. He seemed to relish in my discomfort, as if he enjoyed watching me squirm. I started to feel uneasy, trapped. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. I kept telling myself that I was overreacting, that he was just a little eccentric. As the night wore on, he suggested we go for a walk. I reluctantly agreed, hoping that some fresh air would clear my head. We walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of leaves under our feet. He led me down a narrow path into a dense forest. The trees loomed over us, casting long, ominous shadows. I started to feel a sense of panic rising in my chest. He stopped in a clearing, where an old, dilapidated mausoleum stood silhouetted against the moonlight. It was an eerie, unsettling sight. "This is my favorite place in the world," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I come here to contemplate the mysteries of life and death." He turned to me, his eyes glowing in the darkness. "Do you want to see inside?" he asked. I wanted to say no, to run away as fast as I could, but I was frozen with fear. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. He smiled, a chilling, predatory smile. He pulled out a rusty key and unlocked the heavy iron door. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The smell of decay wafted out, making me gag. He stepped inside, beckoning me to follow. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness. The air inside was thick and heavy, suffocating. I could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on me. He lit a small lantern, casting a flickering light on the stone walls and the rows of decaying coffins. He walked slowly through the mausoleum, pointing out the various inscriptions and emblems on the coffins. He spoke in hushed tones about the lives of the people buried there, their triumphs and tragedies. He seemed to know a lot about them, as if he had studied their lives in detail. I stayed close behind him, my eyes darting nervously around the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. He stopped in front of one particular coffin. It was made of dark wood and was adorned with intricate carvings. "This is my family's tomb," he said. "My ancestors are buried here." He reached out and ran his hand over the surface of the coffin. "They were all fascinating people," he said, "each with their own unique stories to tell." He turned to me, his eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. "I want to show you something," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. He inserted the key into a hidden lock on the coffin and turned it slowly. The lid of the coffin creaked open, revealing the skeletal remains of a woman. She was dressed in a tattered gown, and her long hair was spread out around her head. Her eyes were missing. I gasped and stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He smiled a slow, sinister smile. "This is my great-great-grandmother," he said. "She was a beautiful woman, but she died tragically at a young age." He reached into the coffin and picked up the woman's skull. He held it up to the lantern light, examining it closely. "I've always been fascinated by her story," he said. "She was rumored to have been a witch." He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with madness. "Do you believe in witches?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. I was terrified, trapped in a dark mausoleum with a man who was clearly insane. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid of what he might do. He stepped closer to me, holding the skull out in front of him. "I think you have a touch of the witch in you," he said. "I can feel it." He reached out and touched my cheek with the skull. The cold, bony surface sent a shiver down my spine. I recoiled in horror. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to show you something." He turned and placed the skull back in the coffin. Then he reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a knife. It was a long, sharp knife with a silver blade. My blood ran cold. I knew what was going to happen. He was going to kill me. I tried to run, but he grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Where do you think you're going?" he said, his voice menacing. He raised the knife above his head, his eyes filled with a terrifying rage. I closed my eyes, bracing for the pain. But then, suddenly, there was a loud crash. The door of the mausoleum burst open, and a group of people rushed inside. They were members of the forum, the people who had seen my last message and realized that something was wrong. They tackled him to the ground, disarming him. I ran out of the mausoleum, gasping for air. The police arrived shortly after and took him into custody. It turned out that he had a history of mental illness and had been stalking women online for years. He had lured several other women to secluded locations, but none of them had survived. I was lucky to have escaped with my life. I never went back to the forum. I never collected rare books again. I never dated anyone again. The experience had scarred me too deeply. I still have nightmares about that night, about the dark mausoleum and the man with the knife. The scariest part is, it really happened. Okay, so after the whole Craigslist nightmare, I swore off finding anything important online. Jobs, apartments, dates, nothing. Back to doing things the old-fashioned way, I figured. Which, in my case, meant, well, nothing much different. I was still working at the grocery store, still living in a tiny, overpriced apartment, and still completely alone. My co-worker, Sarah, bless her heart, wasn't having it. She kept nagging me to get back out there, telling me I couldn't let one bad experience ruin dating forever. "Everyone's online these days," she'd say. "You're missing out." Eventually, she wore me down. I hesitantly re-downloaded a dating app. Not Tinder this time. Something a little classier. Or so I thought. This one was called Serendipity, and the whole gimmick was that it matched you with people you'd crossed paths with in real life. The idea was you were already living in the same area. Seemed less creepy than random profiles from who knows where. I created a profile, uploaded a few recent pictures, carefully curated, of course, and started swiping. It was the same old song and dance, endless scrolling, superficial judgments, and the occasional awkward conversation. I wasn't expecting much, but then I saw him. Liam. He was tall, with kind eyes and a disarming smile. His profile said he was a musician, which, okay, maybe a little cliché, but I was a sucker for creative types. We'd apparently crossed paths at a coffee shop near my work, which felt serendipitous, I guess. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost instantly. He messaged me right away, and we started chatting. He was funny, intelligent, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my job, my hobbies, my dreams. It was all so normal. Refreshingly so, after everything I'd been through. We talked for hours that first night, and by the end of it, I was actually excited about the prospect of meeting him. We planned a date for the following weekend, a small jazz club downtown. I picked out a cute dress, spent way too long doing my hair and makeup, and tried to convince myself not to get my hopes up. But deep down, I couldn't help feeling like maybe, just maybe, this could be something good. The jazz club was dimly lit and crowded, but I spotted Liam right away. He was even more attractive in person than in his pictures. He stood when I walked over and gave me a warm hug. The conversation flowed easily throughout the night. We talked about music, movies, books, everything and nothing. He was attentive, funny, and genuinely seemed to enjoy my company. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. As the night wore on, I started to feel a real connection with him. It was like we were on the same wavelength, understanding each other without even having to say much. He walked me back to my apartment, and we stood outside my door for a long time, just talking. He leaned in to kiss me goodnight, and it was perfect. Not too much, not too little. Just right. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face, finally feeling like things were starting to look up. We went on a few more dates over the next few weeks, and each one was better than the last. We went to museums, concerts, and cozy little restaurants. He was always thoughtful, always kind, always made me feel special. I was starting to fall for him, hard. Everything was going so well that I almost forgot about the anxiety that had been plaguing me for so long. I started to relax, to trust again. Then, about a month into dating, things started to get weird. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Little things that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He started asking more personal questions about my past, about my family, about my fears. Not in a creepy way, but in a way that felt probing. He wanted to know everything about me, every detail, every secret. He also started showing up at places I hadn't told him I'd be. The coffee shop near my work, the grocery store, even the park I like to walk in on my lunch breaks. He'd always act surprised, like it was just a coincidence. Oh hey, what a surprise to see you here. But it happened so often that it started to feel deliberate, like he was keeping tabs on me. One night, after a particularly intense date, he asked me if I'd ever felt like I was being watched. I laughed it off, attributing it to his artistic sensibilities. But he didn't laugh. He just stared at me with this unnerving intensity, like he knew something I didn't. Then, one evening, I got a strange message from an unknown number. It was just a single word, run. I blocked the number and tried to convince myself it was just a prank. But the message rattled me. It felt like a warning. I didn't know who sent it or why, but it made me question everything. I decided to confide in Sarah. I told her about Liam, about the strange questions, the coincidental run-ins, and the cryptic message. She listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "This sounds unsettling," she said. "Have you tried Googling him?" I hadn't. I'd been so caught up in a whirlwind romance that I hadn't even thought to do a basic background check. When I got home that night, I did just that. I typed Liam's name into Google, fully expecting to find a few social media profiles and maybe a banned website. What I found was something far more sinister. The first result was a news article from several years ago. The headline read, "Local musician suspected in disappearance of young woman." The article detailed the story of a young woman who had gone missing after dating a local musician named Liam. He was never officially charged, but he was considered a person of interest in the case. My blood ran cold. I scrolled through the article, reading every word, my heart pounding in my chest. The details were horrifyingly familiar. The probing questions, the coincidental run-ins, the intense interest in the woman's past. It was all the same. I scrolled further down and found more articles, more news reports, all detailing similar disappearances. Each one involved a young woman who had dated a musician named Liam. Each one was never found. I felt sick. I wanted to throw up. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind, so naive. I'd been so eager to find love that I'd ignored all the warning signs. I knew I had to get out and fast. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and ran out of my apartment. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I drove to Sarah's apartment, tears streaming down my face. I told her everything I had found, showed her the news articles. She was horrified. She let me stay with her for a few days while I figured out what to do. We went to the police and filed a report. They took my concern seriously, but they said they needed more evidence to take action. They told me to stay away from Liam and to contact him immediately if he tried to contact me. I haven't seen Liam since that night. He hasn't called, hasn't texted, hasn't tried to contact me in any way. It's like he vanished into thin air. The police are still investigating, but so far, they haven't found anything concrete. I moved again, this time to a different city. I changed my name, got a new job, and tried to start over. But the fear still lingers. I still have nightmares about Liam, about his piercing eyes and his probing questions. I still jump at every shadow, every unexpected noise. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced that he's out there somewhere, watching me, waiting. I don't know if he'll ever find me, but I know I'll never truly be safe again. The worst part is knowing how close I came to becoming another statistic, another nameless face in a news article about a missing woman. I was so close to trusting him completely, to letting him into my life. I shudder to think what would have happened if I hadn't seen those articles. What happened next still haunts my dreams. I try to forget. I try to live a normal life. But the fear is always there, lurking in the shadows, a constant reminder of the monster I almost loved. Dating is now a distant memory, and something that I cannot do ever again in my life. I always considered myself pretty level-headed, not the type to jump to conclusions or see conspiracies where they didn't exist. I trusted my gut, but I also believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. That's why, for the longest time, I chalked up the strange occurrences in my relationship with Ben to coincidence, bad luck, or maybe just a little bit of my own anxiety creeping in. I thought I was being paranoid. I really did. I met Ben at a coffee shop near my apartment. He was tall, with kind eyes and a disarming smile. He was reading my favorite book. I know. It sounds like something out of a rom-com, but it really happened. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his intelligence and his sense of humor. He asked for my number, and we went out on a date a few days later. It was perfect. We talked for hours, discovering shared interests and values. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just surface-level stuff. He listened intently when I spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We started seeing each other regularly, and things moved quickly. Within a few weeks, we were practically inseparable. He was always so attentive and affectionate. He'd bring me flowers for no reason, leave little notes on my door, and surprise me with thoughtful gifts. I felt like I had finally found someone who truly cared about me, someone who saw me for who I was. But then, the little things started happening. At first, they were so minor that I brushed them off as insignificant. A missed call from an unknown number that he claimed was just a wrong number. A vague explanation about where he'd been when he was late for a date. A fleeting look of discomfort when I mentioned a certain friend of mine. Individually, these incidents meant nothing, but as they accumulated, a sense of unease began to gnaw at me. One evening, we were at my apartment watching a movie. My phone buzzed with a text message from my friend Sarah. It was a picture of Ben walking down the street with another woman, holding hands. The picture was blurry, but there was no mistaking it was him. My heart sank. I confronted him about it immediately. He looked genuinely shocked, then hurt. He claimed that the woman in the picture was his cousin, who was visiting from out of town. He said he hadn't told me about her because he didn't want to make things complicated. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something about his explanation felt off. His eyes darted around, and his voice was a little too high-pitched. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. From that point on, I started paying closer attention to his behavior. I noticed that he was often vague about his whereabouts, especially on weekends. He'd say he was running errands or hanging out with friends, but he never offered any specifics. He became increasingly secretive with his phone, always turning the screen away from me when he was texting or browsing. One Saturday, he told me he was going to visit his sick grandmother. I offered to go with him, but he insisted that I stay home. He said his grandmother wasn't feeling well and wouldn't want any visitors. I found it odd, but I didn't press the issue. Later that day, I decided to surprise him by bringing him his favorite coffee. I drove to his grandmother's house, which he had mentioned before. But when I arrived, the house was empty. The windows were boarded up, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. I felt a chill run down my spine. My suspicions were confirmed. He was lying to me. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Was I overreacting? Was I just being paranoid? Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe he had a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I decided to do some investigating. I started by subtly questioning his friends about his whereabouts. They all seemed to give me vague, rehearsed answers. It was like they were covering for him. Then, I turned to social media. I searched for his name on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I found nothing. It was like he didn't exist online. That was strange. In this day and age, who doesn't have a social media presence? I became more and more determined to uncover the truth. I started following him, discreetly of course. It felt wrong, but I needed to know what he was up to. I'd park my car down the street from his apartment and wait for him to leave. Then I'd tail him, keeping a safe distance. One afternoon, I followed him to a small, secluded house on the outskirts of town. He parked his car and went inside. I waited for hours, watching the house. I didn't see him leave. As darkness fell, I became increasingly anxious. What was he doing in there? I decided to take a closer look. I crept up to the house, trying to be as quiet as possible. I peered through a window, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Ben was sitting at a table with a woman from the picture. The one he claimed was his cousin. They were holding hands and gazing into each other's eyes. They were laughing and kissing. It was clear that they were more than just cousins. They were a couple. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I couldn't believe it. He had been lying to me all along. I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to confront him, to scream at him, to demand an explanation. But I was also terrified. What if he was dangerous? What if he was capable of more than just lying? I decided to go home and think things over. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of determination. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I was going to confront him and expose his lies. I called him and told him I needed to talk to him. He seemed nervous, but he agreed to meet me at the coffee shop where we had first met. When he arrived, he looked as charming and disarming as ever. But I wasn't fooled anymore. I knew the truth. I started by telling him that I knew about the woman in the picture. I told him that I had followed him to the house and seen them together. He paled. He tried to deny it at first, but I wouldn't let him. I laid out all the evidence, all the lies, all the inconsistencies. Finally, he broke down and confessed everything. He admitted that the woman was his girlfriend, that they had been together for years. He said he had been leading a double life, juggling two relationships. I was furious. I couldn't believe he had been so deceitful, so manipulative. I told him that I never wanted to see him again. I stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving him sitting there alone. I felt a sense of relief, but also a deep sadness. I had invested so much time and energy into this relationship, and it had all been based on lies. In the weeks that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. I leaned on my friends and family for support. I started therapy to deal with the emotional fallout. I learned to trust my instincts and to be more cautious about who I let into my life. Looking back, I realized that there were red flags all along. I just chose to ignore them because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale. I wanted to believe that I had found the perfect guy. But the truth is, sometimes the most charming people are the ones who are hiding the darkest secrets. I thought I was being paranoid, but it turned out my gut was right all along. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but looking back, the first date was a constellation of tiny red flags. I mean, isn't that always the way? Hindsight is 20/20 and all that. But Marco was a special case, a black hole of weirdness disguised as a charming Italian architect. I met him on Hinge. His profile was curated perfection. Photos of him sketching in sun-drenched plazas, leaning against ancient ruins, sipping espresso in what looked like a ridiculously authentic Roman cafe. He was undeniably handsome, with that rugged, Mediterranean look that made my knees a little weak. His bio was short and sweet. Living life one espresso at a time. Let's explore. I swiped right. He swiped right. And within minutes, we were chatting. The conversation flowed easily. He was witty, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked about our favorite books, movies, and travel destinations. He even quoted some obscure Italian poet that I'd never heard of. I was impressed, maybe a little too impressed. We made plans to meet for drinks at a trendy cocktail bar downtown. I was excited, maybe even a little nervous. It had been a while since I'd felt this spark with someone. I spent way too long agonizing over what to wear, finally settling on a classic little black dress and some strappy heels. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the bar nursing a glass of red wine. He stood up as I approached, flashed me a dazzling smile, and pulled out my chair. So far, so good. The first hour or so was great. The conversation was easy, the drinks were strong, and the chemistry was definitely there. He told me about his work, his passion for architecture, and his family back in Italy. I told him about my job as a graphic designer, my love for hiking, and my dreams of one day opening my own art studio. But then, things started to get a little off. He started asking increasingly personal questions, probing into my past relationships, my family dynamics, and my deepest insecurities. It wasn't aggressive, but it was persistent, like he was trying to map out my emotional landscape. Then there was the way he talked about his ex-girlfriends. He described them all as crazy or unstable, painting himself as the long-suffering victim of their emotional turmoil. I found myself wondering if he ever considered that maybe, just maybe, he was the common denominator in all those failed relationships. He also had this weird habit of staring, not a flirty, admiring stare, but an intense, unnerving stare that made me feel like I was under a microscope. He would just fixate on me, his eyes narrowed, as if he was trying to decipher some hidden code. I tried to laugh it off, chalk it up to his artistic temperament. But something about it made me deeply uncomfortable. As the night wore on, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He started rambling about conspiracy theories, talking about secret societies and government surveillance. He claimed that he was being followed, that his phone was being tapped, and that they were trying to control him. I was starting to feel a little trapped. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer territory, but he kept veering off into these bizarre tangents. Then, he started talking about his dreams. Vivid, disturbing dreams filled with cryptic symbols and shadowy figures. He said that he believed his dreams were messages from another dimension, that they held the key to unlocking some ancient secret. At this point, I was actively looking for an escape route. I checked my watch, feigned a yawn, and said that I was starting to feel tired. He didn't seem to notice. He just kept talking, his voice growing louder and more agitated. Finally, I managed to excuse myself to go to the bathroom. I took a deep breath, splashed some cold water on my face, and tried to calm my racing heart. I seriously considered just sneaking out the back door and calling an Uber. But I didn't want to be rude. I told myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe he was just a little eccentric. So, I went back to the table, plastered on a fake smile, and tried to salvage the date. Big mistake. As soon as I sat down, he leaned in close and whispered, "I know what you're thinking." My blood ran cold. "What?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, a chilling, predatory smile. "You're thinking that I'm crazy, that I'm some kind of weirdo. But I'm not. I'm just enlightened." He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I can see things that other people can't see. I can feel things that other people can't feel. I'm connected to something bigger." I tried to pull my hand away, but he wouldn't let go. His eyes were locked on mine, burning with an intensity that bordered on madness. "I know you can feel it too," he said, his voice low and hypnotic. "You're just afraid to admit it." I was terrified. I had no idea what he was going to do. I just wanted to get out of there, to escape his suffocating presence. I managed to wrench my hand free and stood up. "I have to go," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not feeling well." He didn't try to stop me. He just sat there, watching me with that unsettling smile on his face. I practically ran out of the bar, hailed a cab, and sped back to my apartment. I didn't breathe easy until I had locked all the doors and windows and was safely tucked into bed. I blocked Marco's number and deleted him from all my social media accounts. I wanted to erase him from my life completely, but the experience left a mark. For weeks afterward, I felt like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that he was lurking in the shadows. I know it sounds paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, that he hadn't given up on me. And then, a few weeks later, I started receiving strange packages in the mail. The first one was a small, unmarked box. Inside, there was a single red rose, its petals withered and brown. There was no note, no return address. I threw it away immediately, convinced that it was from Marco. But then the packages kept coming. A collection of antique keys, each one different and tarnished with age. A string of black beads, intricately carved with unsettling symbols. A small, hand-painted portrait of a woman with vacant eyes. Each package was more disturbing than the last. They felt like cryptic messages, like pieces of some twisted puzzle that I didn't want to solve. I went to the police, but they couldn't do anything. There was no evidence that the packages were from Marco. No way to trace them back to him. They suggested that I get a restraining order, but I hesitated. I didn't want to provoke him, to escalate the situation. I was afraid of what he might do if he felt cornered. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I moved. I packed up my life, said goodbye to my friends, and moved to a new city, a place where Marco would never find me. It's been 2 years since that first date, and I haven't heard from him since. I try not to think about him, to push the memories to the back of my mind. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed in my new apartment, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there watching me. And I wonder if he ever found the key to that ancient secret, the one that he was so desperately searching for. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now I believe that the fact he knew so much about me so quickly was too uncanny. It makes me sick when I think how easily I gave out personal information. I was so eager to meet someone new that I didn't think about what I was giving away. I'm very grateful that I got out of the situation when I did, even if it meant moving to a new city to feel safe. Picture this, me, happily single, finally starting to enjoy my own company after a string of truly awful relationships. I'm talking dumpster fire level. I'd sworn off dating apps, convinced they were a breeding ground for narcissists and guys who still lived with their moms. But then boredom struck, and maybe a tiny bit of loneliness. So, against my better judgment, I re-downloaded Bumble. I swiped through a sea of gym selfies and cliché bios until I stumbled upon Liam's profile. He wasn't conventionally attractive, but he had this quirky, kind of goofy charm. His pictures showed him hiking, playing guitar, and volunteering at an animal shelter. His bio said he was a history teacher who loved bad puns and even worse dad jokes. I swiped right thinking, what the hell? Maybe this time will be different. We matched instantly, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was witty, intelligent, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything. Our favorite books, our travel dreams, our most embarrassing childhood moments. He actually listened, which was a refreshing change from the usual dating app drivel. After a week of nonstop texting, we decided to meet up for coffee. I was nervous, but also cautiously optimistic. He seemed like the real deal, someone who was actually looking for a connection and not just a hookup. I picked out a cute but casual outfit, did my hair and makeup, and headed to the coffee shop, butterflies fluttering in my stomach. He was even better in person. He had this infectious laugh and a genuine warmth that put me at ease immediately. We talked for hours, losing track of time completely. We discovered we had a shared love for obscure documentaries and a mutual hatred for pineapple on pizza. It felt like we had known each other for years. The coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into a late-night walk through the park. By the end of the night, I was completely smitten. He was everything I had been looking for. Kind, funny, intelligent, and genuine. We started seeing each other regularly after that. We went to museums, concerts, and even tried rock climbing, which was a disaster for both of us. He was always thoughtful and considerate, surprising me with little gifts and handwritten notes. He made me feel special, like I was the only girl in the world. I started to let my guard down, allowing myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found someone who was actually good for me. I introduced him to my friends, and they all loved him. He seemed to fit perfectly into my life, like a missing puzzle piece. Then, a couple of months in, things started to get weird. It started subtly. He would get strangely defensive when I mentioned my past relationships, as if he was threatened by the idea that I had ever been with someone else. He would constantly ask me if I was still talking to my exes, even though I hadn't spoken to them in years. He also started to become increasingly possessive. He didn't like it when I went out with my friends without him, and he would constantly text me when I was away, wanting to know who I was with and what I was doing. I tried to brush it off as insecurity, telling myself that he just really liked me and didn't want to lose me. But the possessiveness kept escalating. He started showing up unannounced at my apartment, claiming he was just in the neighborhood and wanted to say hi. He started questioning my male friends, grilling them about their intentions. One night, I went out to dinner with a group of friends, including a guy I had known since high school. Liam was out of town, so I didn't think anything of it. But when I got home, I found a barrage of angry text messages from him. He accused me of cheating on him, of flirting with my friend, of betraying his trust. I tried to explain that it was just a friendly dinner, that there was nothing going on between me and my friend. But he wouldn't listen. He was convinced that I was lying to him, that I was secretly in love with someone else. The next day, he showed up at my apartment, looking pale and distraught. He begged me to forgive him, saying he was just scared of losing me. He promised he would never act like that again. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something inside me had shifted. The trust was broken. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something, that there was a darkness lurking beneath his charming exterior. I decided to give him another chance, but I also started to do some digging. I did some online searching, looking for anything that might explain his behavior. That's when I found it. An article from a local newspaper detailing a restraining order filed against a man named Liam, his last name, by a former girlfriend. The article described a pattern of harassment, stalking, and emotional abuse. The girlfriend claimed that he had become increasingly possessive and controlling, isolating her from her friends and family. My blood ran cold. It was the same Liam. My Liam. I confronted him with the article, and he didn't deny it. He admitted that he had a history of relationship issues, but he insisted that he had changed. He claimed that his ex-girlfriend was crazy, that she had exaggerated the situation. I didn't believe him. I knew that I had to get out of the relationship, and fast. I broke up with him that day, telling him that I couldn't be with someone who had a history of abuse. He didn't take it well. He begged, pleaded, and threatened, all in the span of a few minutes. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. I told him to leave and never contact me again. He eventually left, but I knew that wasn't the end of it. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and filed a police report. I was terrified, but I was also determined to protect myself. For weeks, I lived in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder. I received anonymous phone calls and creepy messages left on my car. I was convinced that he was stalking me, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Thankfully, the harassment eventually stopped. I never saw Liam again. I don't know if he moved away or if he simply found another target, but I know that I'll never forget the experience. It taught me a valuable lesson about trusting my instincts, about recognizing red flags, and about the importance of protecting myself, no matter how charming someone may seem. Now I have trust issues, and I stay inside, and I never use dating apps. Okay, so I'm Maya. Or, well, I was Maya before everything. Before I met him. Before I realized that sometimes your gut screams for a reason. Before dating apps became the enemy. I'd been single for, ever. Okay, maybe not ever, but long enough to feel like I was wearing the Forever Alone label like a cheap perfume. My friends were all coupled up, posting engagement photos and baby announcements, and I was swiping left on guys who posed with tigers or bragged about their entrepreneurial spirit. Read pyramid schemes. So, yeah, I was ready for a change. I dove headfirst into the online dating pool, convinced that this time would be different. I revamped my profile, got some decent pictures taken, thanks Instagram filters, and started swiping with renewed enthusiasm. I even lowered my standards a little bit. That's when I matched with Alex. He was different. Not in a bad way, at first. He wasn't your typical gym rat or finance bro. He was a writer, or at least that's what he said. He had this brooding, artistic vibe that I found surprisingly attractive. He quoted poetry, talked about existentialism, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Our conversations were stimulating, engaging, and a welcome change from the usual, hey, wanna grab coffee? We texted for a couple of weeks before finally deciding to meet up. He suggested this little hole-in-the-wall bookstore cafe downtown. It seemed quirky and cool, and I was excited. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, finally settling on a vintage dress that I hoped struck the right balance between effortless and trying too hard. The first few dates were amazing. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He was charming, witty, and genuinely seemed to see me, not just the curated version I presented online. He'd bring me little gifts, a rare edition of my favorite book, a vintage postcard from a city I'd always dreamed of visiting, a single, perfect rose. He was attentive, romantic, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. I fell hard. Like, embarrassingly, head over heels. Can't eat, can't sleep kind of hard. I started picturing a future with him, holidays together, meeting his family, maybe even a wedding. Looking back, I see the red flags were there all along, subtle at first, like little whispers of doubt in the back of my mind. But I was so blinded by infatuation that I ignored them, rationalized them, or simply didn't want to see them. He was secretive about his past, always vague about his family and friends. He claimed he was a lone wolf type, preferring his own company to social gatherings. He avoided taking pictures, saying he didn't like being captured. And he had this intense, almost obsessive focus on me, wanting to know everything I was doing, who I was with, and where I was going. But I chalked it up to him being a complex, introverted artist. I told myself it was endearing that he was so interested in me. I was flattered by his attention, even when it felt a little suffocating. The moment I knew something was wrong was when he started showing up unannounced. It started innocently enough. He'd happen to be in my neighborhood and suggest we grab a drink. Or he'd, accidentally, run into me at my favorite coffee shop. I thought it was cute, a sign that he was thinking about me, that he wanted to spend every possible moment together. Then it escalated. One evening, I was having dinner with my friends Sarah and Emily at this Italian place near my apartment. I hadn't seen them in weeks, and I was excited to catch up. We were laughing and gossiping, enjoying the food and the company, when I glanced up and saw Alex standing outside the restaurant, staring at me through the window. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving. He was just watching. His expression was unreadable, but there was something unsettling about his gaze. It felt possessive, intense, and just plain wrong. I froze, my smile faltering. Sarah and Emily noticed something was off and asked what was wrong. I stammered, trying to explain, but I didn't want to scare them. I told them it was just a friend, that I'd be right back. I excused myself and went outside. Alex was still standing there, his eyes fixed on me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He shrugged, feigning innocence. "Oh, hey, I was just in the area and thought I'd see if you were around." "You just happen to be in the area?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "At this restaurant? While I'm having dinner with my friends." He shifted his weight, avoiding my gaze. "Yeah, well, I missed you. I wanted to see you." I didn't buy it for a second. This wasn't a coincidence. This was something else. "Alex, you can't just show up like this," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm having dinner with my friends. I need you to leave." His expression darkened. "So, you'd rather spend time with them than with me?" "That's not the point," I said, exasperated. "I need space. I need to have a life outside of you." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "But I am your life, Maya. We're meant to be together. I'm just trying to show you how much I care." His words sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't love. This was obsession. "Alex, please," I pleaded. "Just go." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes burning with an intensity that scared me. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. I stood there for a few minutes, watching him disappear into the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt shaken, violated, and deeply, profoundly afraid. I went back inside and tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the door opened, I jumped. Every time someone walked past the window, I flinched. I couldn't focus on the conversation. I couldn't eat my food. I just wanted to go home, lock the doors, and hide. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the scene in my head, over and over again. I realized that Alex's behavior wasn't romantic or endearing. It was controlling, manipulative, and potentially dangerous. I knew I had to end things. The next day, I texted him, telling him that I needed to talk. He responded immediately, eager to see me. I suggested meeting at a public park, in broad daylight, surrounded by people. I didn't want to be alone with him. When he arrived, he was wearing the same intense expression he'd had the night before. He didn't say hello. He just stared at me, waiting for me to speak. "Alex," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be in this relationship. It's not healthy." His face contorted in anger. "What are you talking about? What did I do?" "It's not about what you did," I said. "It's about who you are. You're too intense, too controlling. I need space, and you won't give it to me." He scoffed. "Space? What do you need space from? Me. I'm the best thing that's ever happened to you." "That's not true," I said, my voice rising. "You're suffocating me. I can't breathe." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. I love you more than anything in the world." "Let go of me," I said, struggling to free myself. He tightened his grip. "I'm not letting you go. You're mine. You belong to me." I screamed. People turned to look. A couple walking by stopped and asked if I was okay. Alex released my arm, his eyes wide with panic. "I didn't mean to," he stammered. I just don't want to lose you." "It's over, Alex," I said, my voice shaking. "Stay away from me." I turned and ran, as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached my apartment building. I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and collapsed on the couch, sobbing. I knew I had to report him. I knew I had to protect myself. But I was terrified. What if he came after me? What if he hurt me? I spent the next few weeks living in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and installed a security system in my apartment. I went to the police and filed a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence of harassment. They advised me to get a restraining order, which I did. I never saw Alex again, but the fear lingered, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly normal people. I still use dating apps, but I'm much more cautious now. I pay attention to the red flags, trust my gut, and never ignore the whispers of doubt in the back of my mind, because sometimes those whispers are screaming for a reason. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but the way he held my hand during that first date at the park now sends shivers down my spine. It wasn't a romantic, gentle hold. It was firm, possessive, like he was afraid I'd slip away if he loosened his grip for even a second. Back then, I chalked it up to him being genuinely into me, maybe a little nervous. I was flattered, even. I'd been single for a while, jaded by the endless cycle of swiping and ghosting, and Liam seemed different. Attentive, intelligent, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had this captivating intensity in his eyes that drew me in. Now I realized that intensity was a warning sign I completely missed. We met through a mutual friend at a small art gallery opening. He was lingering near a piece I found particularly striking, a chaotic, abstract canvas filled with clashing colors and unsettling shapes. We struck up a conversation about its meaning, about the artist's supposed struggles with mental health, and I was impressed by his insightful observations. He wasn't just making small talk. He seemed genuinely curious about the art, and about my interpretation of it. He asked for my number that night, and I gave it to him without hesitation. The initial weeks of our relationship were a whirlwind. He showered me with attention, constantly texting and calling, making elaborate plans for dates. He remembered every little detail I told him, from my favorite coffee order to the name of my childhood pet. He even surprised me one morning with a rare edition of my favorite book, something I had only casually mentioned wanting to own. It felt like a fairy tale, like I had finally found someone who truly saw me, who appreciated me for who I was. Looking back, I recognized the red flags waving frantically in my face, but I was too caught up in the fantasy to notice. He was subtly isolating. He didn't outright forbid me from seeing my friends, but he always managed to make me feel guilty when I did. He'd sigh dramatically, reminding me of how much he missed me when I was gone, or he'd subtly imply that my friends didn't really understand our connection, that they were jealous of what we had. Slowly, I started seeing my friends less and less, prioritizing my time with Liam, wanting to avoid the guilt trips and the subtle digs. I convinced myself that it was okay, that I was simply prioritizing my relationship, that my friends would understand. They didn't, not really, but they were polite about it, at least for a while. His jealousy was another early warning sign that I dismissed as endearing possessiveness. He didn't like it when I talked to other men, even casually. He'd interrogate me about the conversations, demanding to know what they said, what I said, if they had flirted with me. He'd insist he was just protective, that he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else looking at me. I found it flattering at first, a sign that he truly cared, but it quickly escalated, becoming more intense, more controlling. Then came the controlling behavior. He started dictating what I wore, expressing his disapproval of anything he deemed too revealing or too attention-grabbing. He'd criticize my makeup, telling me I looked better without it, that I was naturally beautiful and didn't need to hide behind artifice. He even started monitoring my social media, questioning who I was following, who was commenting on my posts. He'd get angry if I liked another man's photo, accusing me of flirting, of wanting attention from other men. I started feeling suffocated. The fairy tale had turned into a cage, and I was trapped inside with a man I barely recognized. The attentive, intelligent Liam had morphed into a paranoid, controlling monster, fueled by insecurity and jealousy. I tried to talk to him about it, to explain that his behavior was making me uncomfortable, that I needed space. But he wouldn't listen. He'd dismiss my concerns as paranoia, accusing me of imagining things, of trying to sabotage our relationship. He'd turn the blame back on me, making me feel like I was the one being unreasonable, the one causing problems. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about a harmless comment on my Instagram post, he grabbed my phone and smashed it against the wall. I was stunned into silence, watching as the screen shattered into a million pieces. He immediately apologized, profusely, begging for forgiveness, claiming he hadn't meant to do it, that he had just lost control in the heat of the moment. He promised it would never happen again, that he'd get me a new phone, that he'd go to therapy to manage his anger. I was scared, but I also felt a strange sense of pity for him. I wanted to believe that he could change, that he was genuinely remorseful. I made the mistake of forgiving him. The incident with the phone was a turning point. It marked a clear escalation in his behavior, a shift from subtle manipulation to outright abuse. He became more possessive, more controlling, more unpredictable. I lived in constant fear of triggering his anger, walking on eggshells around him, carefully choosing my words and actions to avoid setting him off. The isolation became complete. I stopped talking to my friends and family, ashamed of what my life had become, afraid of what Liam might do if he found out I had confided in someone. I felt trapped, alone, and utterly helpless. I started experiencing panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The physical abuse started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A gentle squeeze of my arm that left a bruise, a playful shove that sent me stumbling, a tight grip on my wrist that made me wince. Each incident was followed by profuse apologies and promises that it would never happen again. I convinced myself that it wasn't really abuse, that he didn't mean to hurt me, that it was just a result of his overwhelming love for me. I was so deeply enmeshed in his web of manipulation that I couldn't see the truth, even when it was staring me in the face. One night, after I had dared to suggest that we spend an evening apart, he snapped. He pinned me against the wall, his eyes blazing with rage. He screamed at me, calling me names, accusing me of betraying him. He slapped me, hard, across the face. The force of the blow sent me reeling, and I landed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. He stood over me, towering and menacing, telling me that I deserved it, that I had driven him to it. That was the moment I finally realized the truth. I was in danger. My life was in danger. I had to get out. It took weeks of careful planning and calculated deception, but I managed to escape. I waited for a moment when he was out of the house, then packed a small bag, grabbed my passport and what little money I had left, and ran. I went to the police, filed a restraining order, and sought refuge at a women's shelter. The road to recovery has been long and arduous. I'm still dealing with the emotional scars of the abuse, the lingering fear and anxiety, the constant feeling of being watched. I'm in therapy, slowly learning to trust again, to rebuild my life, to reclaim my sense of self. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored, all the warning signs I dismissed. I blame myself for being so naive, so blinded by the illusion of love. But I'm also learning to forgive myself, to recognize that I was a victim of manipulation and abuse, and that I am not responsible for his actions. I still don't think anything of the way he held my hand, It's a constant reminder of the danger that can lurk beneath a charming facade, the importance of trusting your instincts, and the strength it takes to break free from an abusive relationship. I hope that by sharing my story, I can help other women recognize the warning signs and escape before it's too late. I wish someone had warned me about the dating app vortex. I mean, really warned me. Not just the casual "be careful," or "it's a wild world out there," that your friends casually toss your way as you gleefully download Hinge for the first time, thinking, "Finally, a streamlined way to find my soulmate." No, I wish someone had sat me down, looked me dead in the eye, and spelled out the slow, insidious way those apps can warp your perception of reality, of yourself, and of what you even want from a relationship. It started innocently enough. Freshly single after a relatively amicable breakup, I was convinced that the digital dating scene was the modern, efficient way to find the one. My friends had met their partners on apps, so why couldn't I? I crafted a witty profile, curated my best photos, angled just so, filtered to perfection, and dove headfirst into the swiping pool. At first, it was exhilarating. The dopamine rush of a match, the flutter of excitement with a promising conversation, the endless possibilities laid out on my phone screen. I went on a few dates, coffee meetups that fizzled, awkward dinners with guys who looked nothing like their photos, one surprisingly good conversation that led nowhere. But slowly, subtly, things started to shift. The sheer volume of profiles became overwhelming. It was like being presented with an endless buffet of potential partners, each one meticulously packaged and marketed. The spark I was supposed to feel became a fleeting, superficial judgment based on a few pictures and a handful of carefully chosen words. I started developing swipe fatigue. The initial enthusiasm waned, replaced by a weary cynicism. I'd scroll through profiles, barely registering the faces, the hobbies, the ambitions. Everyone started to look the same, generic, interchangeable. And if I'm being honest, I probably looked the same to them. The algorithms, designed to connect you with compatible matches, seemed to reinforce my biases and narrow my options. I was constantly presented with the same types of guys, same jobs, same interests, same carefully constructed image of a desirable partner. The app became an echo chamber, reflecting back my own limited preferences. And then there was the comparison game. Scrolling through endless profiles, I couldn't help but compare myself to the other women. Were my pictures good enough? Was my bio witty enough? Was I interesting enough to stand out from the crowd? My self-esteem, already fragile after the breakup, took a serious hit. The worst part was the objectification, both of myself and of others. The apps encourage you to reduce people to a series of data points: age, location, height, education, interests. It felt transactional, like I was shopping for a partner based on a checklist of desired qualities. The constant rejection, both giving and receiving, became soul-crushing. The ghosting, the breadcrumbing, the endless stream of unanswered messages, it all chipped away at my sense of worth. I started to internalize the idea that I wasn't good enough, that I was somehow unworthy of love. I remember one particular incident that really shook me. I had been talking to a guy for a few weeks, and we seemed to have a genuine connection. We had long, engaging conversations, shared similar interests, and even made plans to meet up. But then, out of the blue, he unmatched me. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. I was devastated. I spent hours analyzing our conversations, trying to figure out what I had done wrong. Had I said something stupid? Was I not attractive enough? I spiraled into a pit of self-doubt, convinced that I was destined to be alone forever. It took me a long time to realize that his behavior had nothing to do with me. He was probably just another casualty of the app vortex, someone who had become jaded and disillusioned by the endless cycle of swiping and superficial interactions. The apps also messed with my sense of time. The constant influx of new profiles created a sense of urgency, a feeling that I was missing out on something better. I'd spend hours swiping, convinced that the perfect partner was just one swipe away. I started neglecting other aspects of my life. My friendships suffered, my hobbies were abandoned, and my work performance declined. I was so focused on finding a relationship that I forgot to cultivate the other relationships in my life. The apps also distorted my perception of what a good relationship even looked like. The constant bombardment of curated profiles and picture-perfect couples on social media created unrealistic expectations. I started to believe that a successful relationship was one that looked flawless on the outside, regardless of what was happening behind closed doors. I became obsessed with finding someone who met all my criteria, someone who was attractive, successful, intelligent, funny, and had all the same interests as me. I was looking for a perfect match, a soulmate who would magically solve all my problems. It took me a long time to realize that such a person doesn't exist. Real relationships are messy, complicated, and require compromise and effort. They're not about finding someone who perfectly aligns with your ideals, but about finding someone who is willing to grow and evolve with you. Eventually, I hit a breaking point. I was exhausted, disillusioned, and utterly depleted. I realized that the apps were not helping me find love. They were actively hindering my ability to connect with others in a meaningful way. I deleted all the dating apps from my phone. It was like taking a deep breath of fresh air after being trapped in a stuffy room. I suddenly had so much more time and energy to focus on myself, my friendships, and my hobbies. I started going to therapy to address my self-esteem issues and to learn healthier ways of relating to others. I reconnected with old friends, tried new activities, and rediscovered my passions. Slowly but surely, I started to heal. I learned to love myself again, to appreciate my own unique qualities, and to stop comparing myself to others. I realized that I didn't need a relationship to be happy, that I was already whole and complete on my own. Ironically, it was when I stopped actively searching for a relationship that I finally found one. I met my current partner through a mutual friend, and it was the most organic, effortless connection I've ever experienced. He's not perfect, and neither am I. We have our disagreements, our flaws, and our moments of insecurity. But we love and accept each other for who we are, and we're committed to building a healthy, sustainable relationship based on trust, respect, and communication. I still cringe when I think about the time I spent lost in the dating app vortex. It was a valuable lesson, but one I wish I could have learned without so much pain and heartache. So, if I could go back in time and warn my younger self about something, it would be this. Be wary of the dating app vortex. Don't let those apps define your worth, distort your perception of reality, or steal your joy. Remember that real connection happens in the real world, and that the best relationship is the one you build with yourself. Don't let the apps take over. Focus on yourself. It takes time to find someone, so don't give up. Don't worry about those who leave. Appreciate who stayed. It started like any other Sunday, lazy, hungover, and filled with the looming dread of the work week ahead. I was scrolling through Instagram, mindlessly liking photos of brunch and puppies, when Sarah, my roommate, burst into the living room, practically vibrating with excitement. "You are not going to believe this," she shrieked, waving her phone in my face. "Remember Mark, the guy I met at that art show last month? Well, he has a lake house, and he invited us for the weekend." I groaned. The last thing I wanted was to spend a weekend playing third wheel at some remote cabin, surrounded by mosquitoes and awkward small talk. But Sarah was relentless. She painted a picture of sun-drenched docks, bonfires under the stars, and maybe even a chance for me to meet someone cute. I caved, mostly because I knew she wouldn't let it go until I agreed. Mark seemed nice enough. He was tall, a little nerdy, with a disarming smile. He brought his friend, David, along, supposedly to even out the numbers, but I suspected Sarah had a hand in it. David was different. He was quiet, intense, with eyes that seemed to look right through you. He barely spoke on the drive up, just stared out the window with this brooding expression that made me intensely uncomfortable. The lake house was exactly what you'd expect, rustic, a little musty, but with a gorgeous view of the water. We unpacked, cracked open some beers, and tried to settle into a weekend of relaxation. Sarah and Mark immediately disappeared to explore the lake, leaving me alone with David. "So," I said, trying to break the ice, "what do you do?" He turned his gaze on me, and it felt like a physical weight. "I'm a writer," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Oh, cool," I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. "What do you write?" "Horror," he said, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Stories about the darkness that lurks beneath the surface." Great, just what I needed. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of forced conversation and mounting unease. David's stories were unsettling, filled with graphic details and twisted psychology. He seemed to take pleasure in watching my reaction, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. I tried to steer the conversation towards lighter topics, but he always managed to bring it back to his macabre obsessions. As evening approached, Mark suggested we build a bonfire on the beach. We gathered driftwood, piled it high, and soon had a roaring fire crackling against the night sky. We roasted marshmallows, told stories, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot about David's creepy vibe. Almost. After a while, Sarah and Mark excused themselves to go for a walk along the shore, leaving me alone with David again. I tried to ignore him, staring into the flames and pretending to be engrossed in the mesmerizing dance of the fire. "You know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "fire is a powerful thing. It can create, but it can also destroy." I didn't respond. "Have you ever wondered," he continued, "what it would feel like to be consumed by it?" I finally turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about, David?" He just smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Just wondering," he said. The night went on, and the tension continued to build. I felt like I was trapped in a horror movie, waiting for the jump scare that was inevitably coming. I tried to stay close to Sarah and Mark, but David always seemed to find a way to isolate me, his presence like a dark cloud hanging over my head. Finally, everyone decided to turn in. I practically ran to my room, locked the door, and barricaded it with a chair. I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to every creak and groan of the old house, convinced that David was lurking outside my door. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke up to a blood-curdling scream. It was Sarah. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding, and ran towards her room. I found her standing in the doorway, her face pale and streaked with tears, pointing towards the bed. Mark was lying there, covered in blood. Chaos erupted. Sarah was hysterical, screaming and crying. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. We waited for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by Sarah's sobs and the distant wail of sirens. When the police arrived, they immediately secured the scene. Mark was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was a single stab wound to the chest. Suspicion immediately fell on David. He was the only one who seemed calm, almost detached, as the police questioned us. He claimed he had been asleep in his room all night and had no idea what had happened. But something about his demeanor felt off, like he was hiding something. The police searched the house, and that's when they found it. A hunting knife, hidden under David's mattress, with Mark's blood on it. David was arrested and taken into custody. I thought it was over. I thought the nightmare was finally coming to an end. I was wrong. The investigation dragged on for months. David maintained his innocence, claiming he had been framed. The police couldn't find any concrete evidence linking him to the crime, other than the knife. The motive was unclear. Then, a few weeks before the trial, I received a letter. It was postmarked from the county jail. The return address was listed as David's. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in David's distinctive handwriting. It read, "Fear makes people honest. You know I did it. You felt it all weekend." I felt sick. I took the letter to the police. They added it to the evidence file, but it wasn't enough to sway the jury. At the trial, David was acquitted. The jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, and he was released. He walked out of the courtroom a free man. Sarah and I were devastated. Justice had not been served. We knew he was guilty, but we couldn't prove it. I tried to put it behind me, to move on with my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that David was still out there, watching me, waiting. A few months after the trial, Sarah disappeared. She went for a hike in the woods near her apartment and never came back. The police launched a search, but they found nothing. No body, no clues, just an empty trail. I knew in my heart that David was responsible. I knew he had taken Sarah, just like he had taken Mark, but I couldn't prove it. I went to the police, told them my suspicions, showed them David's letter. They said they would look into it, but they couldn't do anything without evidence. I felt helpless, consumed by guilt and fear. I knew I had to do something, anything, to stop David before he hurt anyone else. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started following David, watching his every move, trying to gather evidence that would link him to Sarah's disappearance. It was dangerous, reckless, but I didn't care. I was driven by a burning desire for revenge, a desperate need to bring him to justice. One night, I followed David to a remote cabin in the woods, far from civilization. It was the same lake house where Mark had been murdered. My blood ran cold. I watched from a distance as David entered the cabin. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to decide what to do. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I crept towards the cabin, my hand gripping the handle of a knife I had bought earlier that day. I kicked down the door and burst inside. David was standing in the middle of the room, a look of surprise on his face. He was surrounded by photographs of Sarah, taped to the walls. "I knew you'd come," he said, a slight smile playing on his lips. I lunged at him, the knife raised high. He didn't resist. He just stood there, his eyes filled with a strange acceptance. I plunged the knife into his chest, again and again, until he fell to the ground, lifeless. I stood there, panting, covered in blood, staring at David's lifeless body. I had done it. I had avenged Mark and Sarah. But as I stood there, the weight of what I had done began to sink in. I had become a murderer, just like him. I knew I had to turn myself in. I called the police and confessed to everything. I was arrested and charged with murder. At my trial, I didn't deny what I had done. I told the jury the whole story, from beginning to end. They listened intently, their faces etched with shock and horror. After deliberating for several hours, they returned with a verdict. Not guilty. They found me not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. The jury believed that I had been driven to kill David by the trauma of Mark's murder and Sarah's disappearance. I was released from custody and sent to a mental institution for treatment. I spent years in therapy, trying to come to terms with what I had done. I learned to forgive myself, but I never forgot. To this day, I am haunted by the events of that weekend. I wish I could forget what happened, but I know I never will. It's a part of me now, a dark stain on my soul, all because I wanted a bit of romance. It started with a dating app, the kind you scroll through mindlessly while waiting in line or procrastinating on work. I wasn't actively looking for anything serious, just some distraction, maybe a few interesting conversations. Then I matched with him. Let's call him David. He was handsome in a way that felt classic, like a movie star from the 50s. His profile was simple, just a few photos and a short bio about enjoying hiking and old movies. Nothing too revealing, nothing that screamed red flag. Our first few messages were easy, light banter about our favorite films and hiking trails. He was witty and charming, and I found myself looking forward to his messages. It was refreshing compared to the usual dating app interactions. We quickly moved from the app to texting, and then to phone calls. His voice was smooth and calming, and we could talk for hours about anything and everything. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, my hopes, my fears. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and offered insightful perspectives. It felt like I had known him for years, even though we had never met in person. After a couple of weeks of intense communication, he suggested we meet up. I was hesitant at first. I had been burned before by online dating, and I was wary of getting my hopes up. But he was so persuasive, so insistent that we had a real connection, that I eventually agreed. He suggested a small, local Italian restaurant. Nothing too fancy, just a casual dinner. I spent hours getting ready for the date. I wanted to make a good impression, to show him that I was just as interesting and engaging in person as I was on the phone. I picked out a dress I felt confident in, did my hair and makeup, and tried to calm my nerves. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already there, waiting for me at the bar. He looked even more handsome in person, even more like a movie star. He greeted me with a warm smile and a hug that felt surprisingly comfortable. We were seated at a cozy table in the corner, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about our families, our jobs, our dreams for the future. He was attentive and engaging, making me feel like I was the only person in the room. The dinner was delicious, the company even better. By the end of the night, I was completely smitten. He walked me back to my car, and we shared a lingering kiss that left me breathless. I drove home with a giddy smile on my face, feeling like I had finally found someone special. We continued to see each other regularly over the next few weeks. Each date was better than the last. We went hiking, saw movies, explored new restaurants. He introduced me to his friends, and I introduced him to mine. Everyone seemed to love him. He was charming, funny, and genuinely kind. It felt like everything was falling into place. I started to let my guard down, to imagine a future with him. I was falling in love. Then, things started to change. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. He started to become more distant, less responsive. Our texts became shorter, our phone calls less frequent. He started canceling dates at the last minute, citing work or family emergencies. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself that he was just busy, that things would go back to normal soon. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, I decided to surprise him at his apartment. He had given me his address a few weeks earlier, and I had been there a few times. I figured a spontaneous visit might be a nice gesture, a way to reconnect. When I arrived at his building, I buzzed his apartment, but there was no answer. I buzzed again and again, but still nothing. I started to feel a sense of unease, a knot forming in my stomach. I decided to wait in the lobby for a while, hoping he would eventually show up. An hour passed, then two. Still no sign of him. Finally, I decided to leave. As I was walking out of the building, I saw a woman coming in. She looked familiar, like I had seen her somewhere before. We made eye contact, and she gave me a strange, knowing look. "Are you looking for David?" she asked. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, do you know where he is?" The woman sighed. "He's not here," she said. "He doesn't live here." I was confused. "What do you mean? He gave me this address. I've been here before." The woman shook her head. "This is my apartment," she said. "I live here alone." I was stunned. "But, David, he..." The woman frowned. "I don't know any David," she said. "I think you have the wrong place." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "But, I've been here." The woman's expression softened. "Look," she said. "I don't know what's going on, but I think you've been scammed. This building is full of empty apartments. People use them for all sorts of things." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there speechless as the woman walked past me and into the elevator. I stumbled out of the building, my mind racing. I pulled out my phone and tried to call David, but his number was disconnected. I checked his social media profiles, but they had all been deleted. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together what had happened. I contacted his friends, the people he had introduced me to, but none of them knew how to reach him. They said he had suddenly stopped contacting them as well. I went to the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. He hadn't committed any crime. He had just disappeared. I was left with nothing but questions and a broken heart. Who was David? What did he want from me? Was any of it real? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there were red flags all along. The generic profile, the lack of a digital footprint, the sudden change in behavior. I had been so blinded by my own desire for connection that I had ignored all the warning signs. It's been several years since then, and I still don't have any answers. I've tried to move on, to forget about David, but he still haunts me. Every time I see a handsome stranger, every time I receive a charming message, I can't help but wonder if it's him, playing another role, waiting to disappear again. The experience shattered my trust in people, in dating apps, in the possibility of finding love online. I'm more cautious now, more guarded. I'm afraid to let myself be vulnerable, afraid to get hurt again. I know that not everyone is like David, that there are good people out there, but I can't shake the feeling that danger is lurking around every corner, that the person I think I know might be a complete stranger. The truth is, I don't think I'll ever fully recover from what happened. The scars are too deep, the memories too painful. I'm still trying to understand why he did it, what he got out of it. Was it just a game, a sick joke, or something more sinister? I may never know. All I can do is try to learn from my mistakes, to protect myself from future harm, and to share my story, in the hope that it might help someone else avoid the same fate. It still haunts me. I can't see him ever again. He is nothing more than a ghost in my memory. I never thought this would happen to me, but here I am, a statistic, a cautionary tale whispered between girlfriends over wine, the "I told you so," hanging unspoken in the air. I always prided myself on my intuition, my ability to read people. I thought I was too smart, too cynical, to fall for a con artist. I was wrong. It started like any other modern romance. A swipe right, a witty opening line, a flurry of messages that made my cheeks flush. His name was Julian, and his profile painted a picture of the perfect man. Handsome, adventurous, and cultured. He was a photographer, traveling the world, capturing fleeting moments of beauty. His pictures were breathtaking, sunsets over ancient ruins, Vibrant street scenes in faraway lands, portraits of people with stories etched on their faces. He was charming, too. He knew all the right things to say, weaving compliments into our conversations so seamlessly that I barely noticed I was being flattered. He listened intently, remembering details I'd mentioned weeks ago, making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We talked for hours every night, sharing our hopes, our fears, our dreams. He told me about his difficult childhood, his passion for art, his desire to make a difference in the world. I, in turn, opened up about my own insecurities, my career aspirations, my fear of ending up alone. He made me feel safe, understood, and seen. After a couple of weeks, we finally met in person. He was even more captivating than his pictures. He had a disarming smile, kind eyes, and a voice that sent shivers down my spine. We went to a small Italian restaurant, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He told stories about his travels, his voice animated, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. I found myself completely enthralled. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We went on dates to museums, concerts, and art galleries. We cooked dinner together, danced in my living room, and spent hours just talking, lost in each other's company. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: intelligent, sensitive, and passionate. Then came the trip. Julian told me about a photography exhibition he was invited to in Italy. He was hesitant to ask, knowing that I couldn't just leave my job, but he spoke of needing me there, how my perspective was important to him, and most importantly, how this trip would solidify our relationship. He emphasized how he wanted me with him, to share those moments, to make memories, and to experience the beauty of Italy together. He knew how much Italy and the art showcased there meant to me. He sold the trip well. It would only be for a week, and he insisted on covering all the expenses, flights, accommodation, everything. He said he wanted to treat me, to show me how much he cared. Of course, I was skeptical. It seemed too good to be true. But he was so insistent, so genuine, that I eventually gave in. I told myself that I deserved this, that I deserved to be pampered and loved. The day before the trip, he called me, his voice laced with panic. He explained that his bank account had been frozen due to some bureaucratic issue, and he couldn't access the funds he needed to pay for the hotel. He was distraught, fearing that he would have to cancel the trip. I hesitated. It felt wrong. I wanted to run, but I was so caught up in the fairy tale that I couldn't bear to see it end. I offered to lend him the money, just enough to cover the hotel. He promised to pay me back as soon as his account was unfrozen. That was my mistake. The trip was amazing. Italy was everything I had ever dreamed of, and experiencing it with Julian made it even more special. We visited ancient ruins, strolled through charming villages, and ate delicious food. We spent hours exploring art galleries, admiring masterpieces by the masters. He seemed like a completely different person than he was during the phone call. The desperation gone. He took breathtaking photos of me, capturing my essence, my beauty. I felt like a muse, an inspiration. I felt like I was finally living the life I was meant to live. But beneath the surface, something was off. He was distant at times, preoccupied with his phone. He avoided talking about the money I had lent him, brushing it off with vague promises. He always had an excuse. Then, on the last day of the trip, he disappeared. I woke up to find his side of the bed empty, his belongings gone. His phone was switched off, and he hadn't left a note. Panic set in. I called the hotel reception, and they informed me that he had checked out early that morning. I was stranded, alone, and broke in a foreign country. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was going to be sick. It took me days to scrape together enough money to get home. I had to borrow from my family and friends, humiliating myself in the process. When I finally arrived back in my apartment, I felt like a shell of my former self. The truth slowly began to dawn on me. Julian wasn't who he said he was. The photographs, the stories, the charm, it was all a carefully constructed facade. He was a con artist, and I had been his victim. I did some digging and discovered that he had done this before. He had used dating apps to target vulnerable women, weaving elaborate tales of romance and adventure, only to disappear with their money. He left a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts in his wake. I felt foolish, ashamed, and angry. I had let myself be blinded by love, ignoring the warning signs that were right in front of me. I had been so eager to believe in the fairy tale that I had ignored reality. The aftermath was devastating. I lost money, but I lost something much more valuable: my trust. It was hard to believe anyone again. I questioned every interaction, every compliment, every gesture of kindness. I saw ulterior motives everywhere. I became cynical, guarded, and withdrawn. It took me a long time to heal. I went to therapy, talked to my friends and family, and slowly began to rebuild my life. I learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, and to be wary of people who seem too good to be true. I'm still single, and I'm still hesitant to date. The experience with Julian left deep scars, but I'm determined not to let it define me. I refuse to let him steal my ability to love and trust. I know that there are good people out there, people who are genuine and honest. I just have to be patient, cautious, and discerning. I never thought this would happen to me, but I survived. I learned a valuable lesson, albeit a painful one, and I'm determined to use my experience to help others avoid the same fate. If you're dating online, be careful. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to do your research, and to trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let yourself be swept away by romance. Take your time, get to know the person, and don't be afraid to walk away if you feel uncomfortable. And remember, you are not alone. There are people who care about you, people who will support you, and people who will help you heal. Don't let a con artist steal your happiness. Don't let them steal your trust. And never, ever give up on love. The world is filled with incredible people who want to love you for who you are. Okay, so, this is hard to talk about. It's not a ghost story or anything supernatural, just messed up. Real messed up. It happened last year. I was trying to get back into dating after a really bad breakup. You know, the kind where you feel like you'll never trust anyone again. I was doing the whole app thing, Bumble, Hinge, the works. Just swiping and hoping to find someone normal, someone who wouldn't make me want to run for the hills. I matched with this guy, Mark. He seemed pretty cool at first. His profile was normal, he had a decent job, and he was into hiking, which I also enjoy. We chatted for a week or so, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my interests, my family, my goals, all the usual stuff. Nothing seemed off. We decided to meet for coffee. He picked a place near my apartment, which was convenient. When I saw him, he was taller than I expected. He was attractive, with kind eyes and a friendly smile. The date went really well. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say, and I felt comfortable around him, which was rare for me after the breakup. We went on a few more dates after that. Hiking, dinner, a movie, all pretty standard stuff. He was always a gentleman, opening doors, paying for meals, and making sure I got home safe. I started to let my guard down, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found someone decent. Then, things started to get weird. It started small. He would text me constantly, even when I was at work. At first, I thought it was sweet, like he was just really into me. But then it became excessive. If I didn't respond immediately, he would call me repeatedly, asking where I was and what I was doing. He also started showing up unannounced at my apartment. He would say he was just in the neighborhood, or that he wanted to surprise me with flowers. It was flattering at first, but then it became intrusive. I started feeling like I couldn't have any personal space. One night, I was out with my friends, and he texted me, asking where I was. I told him, and he showed up at the bar within 15 minutes. He acted like it was no big deal, but I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. My friends noticed it too. They told me he was being too intense, and that I should be careful. I tried to talk to him about it. I told him that I needed some space, and that I couldn't be with someone who was so clingy. He didn't take it well. He got defensive, saying that he was just really into me and that he didn't want to lose me. He promised he would change, that he would give me more space. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. Things escalated quickly after that. He started accusing me of cheating on him, even though I had given him no reason to doubt me. He would go through my phone when I wasn't looking, checking my messages and call history. He even started following me when I went out with my friends. I was terrified. I felt like I was being suffocated, like I couldn't breathe. I knew I had to end things, but I was scared of how he would react. One night, I came home from work and found him waiting for me outside my apartment. He was furious. He accused me of ignoring him all day and said that he knew I was seeing someone else. I tried to stay calm, but I was shaking. I told him that I couldn't do this anymore, that I needed to end things. He snapped. He grabbed my arm, his grip tightening until it hurt. He started yelling at me, telling me that I was his and that I couldn't leave him. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. I was screaming and crying, begging him to let me go. Finally, a neighbor heard the commotion and came outside. Mark saw him and panicked. He let go of me and ran off. I was a mess. I called the police and filed a report. They took it seriously, but they said that unless he physically harmed me, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to get a restraining order, which I did. The restraining order helped, but it didn't stop him completely. He would still drive by my apartment, and he would call me from different numbers. I changed my number, but he somehow managed to get it again. I was living in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and I couldn't focus on anything. I felt like my life was falling apart. I decided to move. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my family. I just packed up my things and left. I needed to disappear, to start over somewhere where he couldn't find me. I've been in my new place for a few months now. I feel safer, but I'm still scared. I still have nightmares about him, and I still jump at every unexpected sound. I haven't dated anyone since. I'm not sure if I ever will again. The experience completely shattered my trust in people. I'm afraid of getting hurt again, afraid of letting someone get too close. It's hard to explain how much this has affected me. It's not just that I had a bad experience with a guy. It's that I realized how easily someone can manipulate and control you, how quickly a seemingly normal relationship can turn into a nightmare. I know I need to move on, to heal and rebuild my life. But it's hard. The scars are still fresh, and the fear is still real. All from swiping right. It's so messed up. I keep replaying everything, wondering if I missed something along the way. Some flag that would have saved me from all of this. I don't know if I'll ever be the same person I was before I met Mark. But I'm trying. I'm going to therapy, and I'm focusing on myself, on my goals and my happiness. I'm determined to not let this experience define me, to not let it ruin my life. I will get through this. I have to. It's just going to take time. A lot of time. And a lot of therapy. The dating app scene had become a blurry carousel of faces and half-hearted conversations for me. I'd been swiping, matching, and occasionally meeting up for the better part of a year, searching for something, anything, that felt like more than just a fleeting connection. I wasn't necessarily looking for the one, just someone interesting, someone who could hold a conversation that went beyond surface-level pleasantries, someone who didn't just want to text you up at 2 a.m. It was a grind, a digital slog through a landscape of filtered photos and vapid bios. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was different. No gym selfies, no pictures posing with exotic animals, no cliches. Just a couple of candid shots. One of him hiking in the mountains, another of him laughing with friends at a bar. His bio was short and sweet. Writer, reader, aspiring rock climber, looking for someone to share stories with. I was intrigued. We started chatting, and unlike most of my other dating app interactions, the conversation flowed easily. He was witty, intelligent, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked about books, movies, our families, our dreams. We debated the merits of different pizza toppings and shared embarrassing childhood stories. He seemed normal, refreshingly so. After a week of near-constant texting, we decided to meet for coffee. He suggested a small, independent cafe near my apartment, a place I'd been meaning to try. I was nervous, of course, but also excited. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be something real. The coffee date went well. He was even more charming in person than he was online. We talked for hours, oblivious to the other patrons around us. We discovered a shared love of old movies and a mutual disdain for reality television. He made me laugh. He listened attentively, and he didn't try to touch me inappropriately. It was perfect. We went on a second date, then a third. We explored local museums, went to a concert, and even cooked dinner together at my apartment. He was always respectful, considerate, and genuinely seemed to enjoy my company. I started to let my guard down, to allow myself to believe that maybe I had finally found someone worth investing in. A few weeks into dating, Liam invited me to his apartment. He lived in an older building downtown, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and high ceilings. He was proud of the space, he told me, a place he'd worked hard to make his own. I was a little hesitant, but I trusted him. I felt safe with him. His apartment was exactly as I'd imagined, filled with books, records, and quirky artwork. He had a cozy reading nook with a plush armchair and a floor lamp, a record player spinning a vintage jazz album, and a collection of succulents thriving on a windowsill. It felt like a sanctuary, a reflection of his personality. We spent the evening listening to music, drinking wine, and talking. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did. We were comfortable, relaxed, and enjoying each other's company. As the night wore on, we moved closer, our bodies touching, our voices softening. He kissed me, and it was nice. Not earth-shattering, but gentle and tender. We continued kissing, exploring each other's mouths, our hands moving over each other's bodies. He was still respectful, still attentive to my cues. I felt safe, comfortable, and desired. We moved to the bedroom, and things started to escalate. He was still being careful, still making sure I was okay, but the intensity was building. We were both getting caught up in the moment, lost in the pleasure of the physical connection. Then, he reached for something on the nightstand. It was a tie. A silk tie, navy blue with a subtle paisley pattern. "What's that for?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that I had never seen before. "I thought we could try something new," he said, his voice low and husky. My heart started to race. A knot formed in my stomach. I had never been into anything like that. I wasn't into anything like that. I don't think so," I stammered, pulling away slightly. His smile didn't falter. "Come on," he said, reaching for my hands. "Don't be scared. It'll be fun." "No, really," I said, my voice shaking now. "I'm not comfortable with that." He sighed, his expression shifting from playful to annoyed. "You're no fun," he said, his voice hardening. "I thought you were more adventurous than this." I sat up in bed, pulling the sheet around me. "I am adventurous," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But I don't want to do that." He rolled his eyes. "Fine," he said, tossing the tie back onto the nightstand. "Whatever." He turned away from me, his back to me. The silence in the room was thick and heavy. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to leave, to run out of the apartment and never look back. "Are you mad?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. "Liam." He still didn't answer. I got out of bed and started getting dressed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely button my jeans. He still didn't acknowledge me, didn't even turn around. As I was putting on my shoes, he finally spoke, his voice cold and distant. "You know," he said, "you're not as special as you think you are. Plenty of other girls would be happy to do what I wanted." That's when I realized that the man I thought I knew, the man I had been falling for, was a complete stranger. The charming, intelligent, and respectful Liam I had met on the dating app was just a facade, a carefully constructed persona designed to lure me in. I never felt unsafe until that moment, when I realized that the man lying in his bed, the man who I trusted, thought I was someone who should be forced to do things I didn't want to do. I grabbed my purse and walked out of his apartment, leaving him alone in his cold, sterile space. I didn't say a word. I just left. The walk home was a blur. I was shaking, crying, and struggling to make sense of what had just happened. I felt violated, betrayed, and utterly foolish. When I finally got back to my apartment, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and curled up in a ball on my bed. I stayed there for hours, replaying the evening in my head, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. I deleted Liam's number from my phone, blocked him on all social media, and vowed to never speak to him again. I also deleted the dating app. The thought of going back into that digital meat market filled me with dread. It took me a long time to recover from that experience. I struggled with trust issues, anxiety, and a deep sense of shame. I blamed myself for being naive, for letting my guard down, for believing that I had finally found someone genuine. Eventually, I realized that I wasn't to blame. Liam was the one who was wrong, the one who had betrayed my trust, the one who had tried to pressure me into doing something I didn't want to do. I learned a valuable lesson that night, a lesson about the importance of trusting my instincts, of setting boundaries, and of never compromising my values for anyone. I haven't given up on dating entirely, but I'm much more cautious now. I take things slow, I pay attention to red flags, and I trust my gut, and I always have an exit strategy. I thought it was just my imagination, until I found the photo album. Dating in your late 20s feels a lot like sifting through a very dusty, very disappointing antique store. Most of the items are broken, overpriced, or just plain boring. You keep hoping to find that one unique treasure, the thing that makes all the browsing worthwhile, but mostly you just end up with a layer of grime and a lingering sense of regret. That's how I felt about dating. Anyway, until I met Julian. I met him the old-fashioned way, at a friend's birthday party. He wasn't the type I usually went for. I was drawn to the brooding, artistic types, the guys who wrote poetry on napkins and wore exclusively black. Julian was sunny. He was a graphic designer, dressed in khakis and a button-down, and his laugh was loud and infectious. He told terrible jokes, but he told them with such genuine enthusiasm that I couldn't help but smile. He seemed normal, refreshingly, boringly, wonderfully normal. And maybe that's why I fell for him so quickly. After years of dating guys who were fascinating but emotionally unavailable, Julian was a breath of fresh air. He texted back promptly. He made plans in advance, and he actually seemed interested in what I had to say. Our dates were simple: coffee shops, museums, walks in the park, but they were nice. Genuinely nice. It felt like I was building something real, something solid, for the first time in a long time. Of course, there were little things, quirks that I brushed off as just part of his personality. He was intensely private about his past. He'd deflect questions about his family or previous relationships with a joke or a change of subject. He also had this odd habit of staring, sometimes for uncomfortably long periods, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel both flattered and slightly uneasy. But I chalked it up to him being smitten. I was smitten too, after all. The biggest quirk, though, was his apartment. Or rather, the lack of anything personal in it. It was clean and modern, all stark white walls and minimalist furniture, but it felt sterile, like a hotel room someone had been living in for a while. There were no photos, no books, no mementos of any kind. I mentioned it once, casually, and he just shrugged and said he wasn't much for clutter. I accepted that, even though it felt strange for someone to have absolutely no visible reminders of their life. Things progressed quickly. Within a few months, we were spending most nights together. I started leaving things at his place. A toothbrush, a change of clothes, a book. It felt like we were moving towards something serious, something permanent. I started to imagine a future with him, a future filled with khakis and terrible jokes and a level of normalcy I had never experienced before. Then the dreams started. They weren't nightmares, exactly, but they were unsettling. I would dream of being in a crowded room, surrounded by faces I didn't recognize, all of them staring at me with blank, unreadable expressions. And then Julian would appear, pushing his way through the crowd, his eyes dark and intense, his voice a low whisper that I couldn't quite make out. I would wake up feeling disoriented and vaguely afraid, the feeling lingering long after the dream had faded. I dismissed them as just stress, a byproduct of the fast-paced nature of our relationship. But the dreams kept coming, night after night, each one more vivid and disturbing than the last. And then, the feeling of being watched started to creep in. It started subtly, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck when I was alone in my apartment, the feeling that someone was standing just outside my field of vision. I would turn around quickly, expecting to see something, but there was never anything there. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the dreams get to me. But then I started noticing things out of place. A drawer slightly ajar. A book moved from the nightstand to the dresser. Again, nothing major. Nothing that I could definitively say was evidence of someone being in my apartment. But the feeling of unease intensified, gnawing at me constantly. I started confiding in my best friend, Sarah. She listened patiently as I recounted the dreams, the strange occurrences, the growing sense of dread. She tried to reassure me, telling me I was probably just stressed and sleep-deprived. But I could see the concern in her eyes. "Maybe you should talk to Julian about it," she suggested. "He's your boyfriend. He should know what's going on." I hesitated. I didn't want to burden him with my anxieties. I didn't want to seem crazy. But the feeling of being watched was becoming unbearable, and I knew I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I decided to talk to him that night. I went to his apartment after work, my heart pounding in my chest. He greeted me with a smile and a hug, but I could sense a tension in the air, a subtle shift in his demeanor. "I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He led me to the living room, where we sat down on the stark white couch. I took a deep breath and started to explain, haltingly, about the dreams, the feeling of being watched, the things out of place in my apartment. As I spoke, his expression grew increasingly serious. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer any reassurances. He just listened, his dark eyes fixed on me with that unnerving intensity. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, he stood up and walked to a bookshelf that I hadn't noticed before. It was hidden behind a panel in the wall, a secret compartment that I had never seen. He reached inside and pulled out a large, leather-bound photo album. "I think you should see this," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I took the album from him, my hands trembling. The cover was blank, with no title or inscription. I opened it cautiously, and that's when I saw them. The photos were of me. Dozens of photos, taken at different times and in different places. Photos of me walking down the street, sitting in coffee shops, browsing in bookstores. Photos of me in my apartment, through my window, taken from across the street. Photos of me sleeping, taken from inside my bedroom. My blood ran cold. I flipped through the pages, my breath catching in my throat. The photos spanned months, documenting my every move, my every activity. It was like someone had been stalking me, meticulously recording my life. And then I saw the older photos, the photos of other women. They looked vaguely similar to me, with the same hair color, the same eye shape, the same general build. They were in similar settings, doing similar things. And as I flipped through the pages, I noticed a disturbing pattern. The photos started out normal, candid shots of everyday life. But as I progressed through the album, the photos became more intimate, more invasive. There were photos of the women undressing, showering, sleeping. And then the photos stopped. Abruptly, the last few pages of the album were blank. I looked up at Julian, my eyes wide with horror. He was standing there, watching me, his expression unreadable. "Who are these women?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I told you I was private. I collect things," he said, his voice low and menacing. I should have realized he was obsessed, but he was a master manipulator. I thought it was just my imagination, turned out to be very real. I was going to be his next photo, for his collection. I stood up slowly, backing away from him. I had to get out of there. I had to get away from him. He stepped towards me, blocking my path. "Where do you think you're going?" he said, his eyes glinting with a predatory light. I didn't answer. I just turned and ran, fumbling with the door handle, desperate to escape. I managed to get the door open and burst out into the hallway, sprinting towards the elevator. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I pressed the elevator button frantically, praying for it to arrive. The doors finally opened, and I jumped inside, stabbing the closed door button repeatedly. I could see him running towards the elevator, his face contorted with rage. The doors closed just as he reached them. I leaned against the back wall of the elevator, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I looked down at the photo album, still clutched tightly in my hands. It was a chilling reminder of the danger I had just escaped. When the elevator reached the ground floor, I ran out into the street, not stopping until I reached a crowded intersection. I flagged down a taxi and gave the driver my address, my voice barely a whisper. I spent the next few days in a state of shock, barely able to eat or sleep. I reported Julian to the police, showing them the photo album as evidence. They took my statement and promised to investigate, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. He was too careful, too clever. I moved out of my apartment immediately, finding a new place in a different part of the city. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and tried to erase myself from his life. I still have nightmares about him, about the photos, about the chilling realization that I had been dating a monster. I don't think I'll ever be able to trust anyone completely again. The antique store of dating is not worth the treasure at the end. Okay, so, I need to tell someone about this. I've been holding it in for way too long, and honestly, it's starting to mess with my head. It's a dating story, but not the kind you laugh about with your friends over brunch. This is the kind of story that makes you check the locks on your doors 10 times before you can even think about sleeping. I was in my early 20s, living in a new city, trying to find myself. You know, the whole cliché thing. Part of that was getting back into the dating scene after a messy breakup. I figured, why not? New city, new me, new guys. I downloaded all the apps, Bumble, Hinge, Tinder, the whole shebang. It was mostly the usual, awkward conversations, bad pickup lines, and the occasional decent date that fizzled out after 1 or 2 tries. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was different. Not in a bad way, just unique. He wasn't doing the typical gym selfie or holding a fish he caught. His pictures were mostly candid shots of him doing random things, reading in a park, sketching in a coffee shop, exploring some old building that looked like it was about to fall apart. He had this intense, almost brooding look in his eyes, but there was also a hint of something else, something artistic, intriguing. I'm not really sure how to describe it. His bio was short and sweet. Writer, wanderer, seeker of strange beauty. Okay, a little pretentious, maybe, but I was drawn to it. I've always been a sucker for the artsy type. We started chatting, and the conversations were actually really good. He wasn't trying to be overly flirty or pushy. He asked genuine questions about me, my interests, my dreams. We talked about books, movies, music, and everything in between. He was incredibly intelligent and articulate, and he had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world he was talking to. After a week or so of texting, he suggested we meet up. I was hesitant at first. I mean, you never really know who you're talking to online, right? But something about him felt different. He seemed genuine, and I was honestly really curious to meet him in person. He suggested this small, independent bookstore/cafe in a quieter part of the city. It sounded perfect, low-key, relaxed, and a good way to gauge if we actually had any chemistry in real life. I got there a little early, nervous as hell. I ordered a coffee and sat at a small table near the window, trying to look nonchalant while secretly scanning the room for him. Then he walked in and wow, he was even more attractive in person. He had this messy, dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a charmingly crooked smile. He was wearing a worn leather jacket and a black t-shirt, and he just exuded this effortless coolness. The date started off great. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He was just as intelligent and engaging in person as he was online. He told me about his writing, his travels, his fascination with folklore and mythology. I told him about my job, my friends, my aspirations. We laughed, we debated. We connected on a level that I hadn't experienced with anyone in a long time. As the evening wore on, the cafe started to empty out. The barista began stacking chairs and wiping down tables, giving us subtle hints that it was time to leave. Liam suggested we go for a walk. It was a beautiful night. The air was crisp and cool, and I didn't want the day to end. So I said yes. We strolled through the quiet streets, talking and laughing, enjoying each other's company. He led me down a narrow alleyway, explaining that it was a shortcut to a nearby park. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but as we walked deeper into the alley, the atmosphere started to change. The streetlights flickered and buzzed, casting long, distorted shadows. The air grew colder, and I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. Liam stopped walking and turned to face me. His expression had changed. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a strange, almost predatory glint in his eyes. "You know," he said, his voice suddenly deeper and more gravelly. "I've been watching you for a while." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. "I've been following you, learning your habits, your routines. I know where you live, where you work, who your friends are." I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest. This wasn't a date gone wrong. This was something else entirely. "You're scaring me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Scared? Good. Fear is a powerful motivator." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, silver knife. The blade glinted ominously in the dim light. "Don't worry," he said, his voice dripping with false reassurance. "I'm not going to hurt you yet. I just want to show you something." He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, and started pulling me further down the alley. I tried to resist, but he was too strong. I was trapped. He led me to a dead end, a dark and secluded corner of the alleyway. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like blood, were a series of symbols and strange markings. "Do you know what these are?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. I shook my head, terrified. "They're sigils," he said, his voice hushed and reverent. Ancient symbols of power. They can unlock hidden dimensions, open gateways to other worlds. He started chanting in a language I didn't understand, his voice growing louder and more frantic. The air around us crackled with energy. I felt a strange tingling sensation all over my body. I knew I had to get out of there. I had to escape. I took a deep breath and mustered all my courage. I kicked him in the shin as hard as I could. He yelped in pain and stumbled backward, momentarily losing his grip on my hand. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, as fast as my legs could carry me. I ran out of the alleyway and onto the main street, gasping for breath. I didn't look back. I just kept running until I reached a crowded area, a brightly lit street filled with people. I flagged down a taxi and told the driver to take me home. I didn't stop shaking until I was safely inside my apartment, the doors locked and bolted. I called the police and reported what happened. They took my statement, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. They said it was probably just some harmless weirdo, and that I should avoid walking alone at night. I knew it was more than that. I knew that Liam was dangerous, that he was obsessed with something dark and sinister. I spent the next few weeks living in constant fear. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and avoided going out alone. I was terrified that Liam would find me again. I never heard from him again. The police never found him. He just vanished. But I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget the look in his eyes, the sound of his voice, the chilling realization that I had been targeted, stalked, and almost sacrificed. I still don't know what his intentions were. I'm still haunted by the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't managed to escape. I haven't used dating apps since. I'm too afraid. I'm too afraid of running into another Liam, another predator lurking behind a charming profile and a witty bio. I'm still trying to piece together what happened that night, to make sense of the madness. I've done some research on sigils and ancient symbols, but I haven't found anything that sheds any light on Liam's obsession. Maybe it was all just a bizarre coincidence, a series of unfortunate events that led me to cross paths with a mentally unstable individual. Or maybe there was something more to it, something darker, something supernatural. I don't know, and I probably never will. All I know is that I'm still scared, still cautious, still looking over my shoulder, and I'll probably always be. Dating is hard enough without having to worry about being stalked by a potential cultist. It's a scary world out there, and sometimes the monsters are hiding in plain sight, disguised as charming strangers with intriguing profiles. Be careful who you swipe right on. You never know what, or who, you might be inviting into your life. My heart still races when I remember the Paisley incident. It wasn't just one bad date. It was a series of escalating oddities that culminated in something I still can't fully explain, even to myself. I've always been a pretty grounded guy, logical, maybe even a bit boring. I work as a software engineer, which probably explains the boring part. I'm not one for ghost stories or conspiracy theories. I like things that make sense, things you can debug. But Paisley defied all logic. I met her on a dating app, nothing fancy, just the usual endless scroll. Her profile stood out because it was simple. Just a few pictures of her hiking, reading, and one slightly blurry shot of her laughing with friends. No filters, no over-the-top captions. She seemed real. Her bio just said, "Looking for someone to explore the world with, one bookstore at a time." I liked that. I sent her a message about a local bookstore I thought she might enjoy, and we started talking. Our conversations were easy, comfortable. We shared a similar sense of humor and a love for the outdoors. She was a writer, working on a novel, which I thought was cool. It was a welcome change from the usual small talk. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet for coffee. The coffee date was strange. Not bad, just off. She was beautiful, even more so than in her pictures. Long, dark hair, piercing green eyes, and a smile that could melt glaciers. But she was also incredibly nervous. She fidgeted constantly, avoided eye contact, and spoke in this soft, almost hesitant voice. I tried to make her feel comfortable, asking about her writing, her hikes, anything to break the ice. But her answers were vague, almost evasive. She'd change the subject quickly, or offer these cryptic little remarks that didn't really make sense. At one point, I asked her where she liked to hike, and she said, "Places where the trees remember things." I laughed, thinking she was being poetic, but she just stared at me with this intense, unblinking gaze that made me uneasy. Despite the weirdness, I was still drawn to her. There was something captivating about her, a vulnerability that made me want to protect her. Maybe I was just lonely, or maybe I was intrigued by the mystery, but I asked her out again. To my surprise, she said yes. Our second date was even stranger than the first. We went to a small, independent movie theater to see some foreign film I had never heard of. Paisley insisted it was important. The movie was bizarre, full of surreal imagery and disjointed scenes. I didn't understand half of it. Paisley, on the other hand, seemed completely engrossed. She even cried during one particularly strange scene involving a talking cat. After the movie, we went for a walk in a nearby park. The park was deserted, which added to the unsettling atmosphere. As we walked, Paisley started telling me about her novel. She said it was a story about a woman who could see the future, but only in her dreams. The woman was haunted by these visions of a coming apocalypse, and she had to find a way to stop it. The story was interesting, if a bit far-fetched, but as Paisley told it, her voice became more and more intense, her eyes shining with this almost manic energy. She started talking about the signs she was seeing in the real world, the omens that confirmed her novel's prophecy. She mentioned things like increased seismic activity, strange weather patterns, and a general sense of societal decay. It sounded like she actually believed this stuff. I tried to gently steer the conversation in a different direction, but she wouldn't let it go. She kept talking about the apocalypse, about the need to be prepared, about the importance of listening to your intuition. It was starting to freak me out. I made up some excuse about having an early morning at work and ended the date early. I should have stopped there. I should have cut my losses and moved on. But something about Paisley kept pulling me back. Maybe it was the damsel in distress thing, or maybe I was just curious to see how weird things could get. Whatever the reason, I agreed to a third date. This time, Paisley suggested we go for a hike. She said she wanted to show me a special place she had discovered in the woods outside of town. I hesitated, but she was so insistent, so pleading, that I couldn't bring myself to say no. The hike started out normally enough. We drove to a trailhead and started walking into the woods. The path was narrow and overgrown, and the trees were thick and gnarled. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. As we walked deeper into the woods, Paisley became more and more animated. She pointed out different plants and animals, telling me their secret meanings. She said the woods were alive, that they were watching us, that they knew things we couldn't possibly imagine. After about an hour of hiking, we reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large, ancient-looking oak tree. The tree was massive, its branches reaching up towards the sky like twisted arms. Paisley walked over to the tree and placed her hand on its trunk. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "This is it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is the place." "The place for what?" I asked, feeling a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. "The place where the veil is thin," she said, her eyes still closed. "The place where we can see the truth." I didn't like the sound of that. "Paisley, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. She opened her eyes and looked at me, her gaze intense and unsettling. "I'm talking about the end, my name," she said. "The end is coming, and we need to be ready." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, silver knife. "We need to make an offering," she said, her voice now calm and matter-of-fact, "to appease the spirits." I stared at the knife, my mind racing. "Paisley, put the knife down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't funny." She didn't move. "They want something precious," she said, her eyes fixed on me. "Something valuable." I knew I had to get out of there. I slowly backed away from her, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think I'm going to go," I said, turning to leave. "You can't leave," she said, her voice suddenly sharp and commanding. "You're part of this now." She lunged at me with the knife. I screamed and jumped out of the way. The knife grazed my arm, leaving a shallow cut. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, back the way we had come. I could hear Paisley behind me, shouting something about destiny and sacrifice. I didn't look back. I just kept running until I reached the trailhead. I called the police as soon as I got to my car. They took me to the station and took my statement. They sent officers into the woods to find Paisley. They found her near the oak tree, sitting cross-legged on the ground, humming to herself. She didn't resist arrest. I pressed charges. Paisley was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and several other offenses. She was eventually found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a mental institution. I haven't seen or heard from her since. I still think about her sometimes, about those strange dates, about the knife in the woods. I wonder if she was really crazy, or if she somehow tapped into something real, something beyond my comprehension. I still go on dates, but I'm a lot more cautious now. I do a thorough background check on every woman I meet, and I always have an escape plan. I haven't told many people about the Paisley incident. They wouldn't understand. They'd think I was crazy too. But I know what happened. I know what I saw. And I know that some things just can't be explained. Sometimes I lie awake at night, listening to the wind rustling through the trees outside my window. And I wonder if the trees remember.